two basic concepts that every pilot must understand to properly diagnose engine problems in flight. One is air pressure, and the second is how this air pressure affects the combustion engine. Every pilot has to know that the higher the altitude, the thinner the air, and the harder it is for an engine to breathe and produce power. Almost every high-performance piston-powered aircraft has a manifold pressure gauge. This gauge simply reads the air pressure just before it enters the combustion chamber. At sea level, standard barometric pressure is about 30. So when you're sitting on the ground at sea level in your aircraft with your engines off, your manifold pressure gauge should read about 30. If you could magically lift your aircraft into the air without the engine running, this manifold pressure would continue to drop as you gained altitude, as it's simply reading the air pressure as it gets thinner the higher you go. Now we are on the ground with our engines idling, and our manifold pressure is well below the air pressure outside. Why? Now remember, the engine is an air pump. Now look at that throttle valve. The engine, our air pump, is now pulling that air past that throttle valve. It has created a vacuum. Now we open the throttle and the manifold pressure goes up. It's simply returning back to the standard air pressure outside because the vacuum has been eliminated. Okay, so now imagine we have put a very tired engine on our B-17, number 1 engine. Number 2 engine is brand new. Number 2 engine is a very strong air pump. Number 1 is a weak air pump. Now we're idling. Look at what's happening. The number 2 engine, the healthy engine, is creating a strong suction, pulling that manifold pressure gauge down. However, the number 1 engine, the weak air pump, is not creating as much of a suction. Therefore, the manifold pressure on the weaker engine is reading higher. So in this case, a lower manifold pressure indicates higher suction from the stronger engine. Now, look at the RPM gauges below. The RPM in this case is indicating this engine is not producing as much power as the number 2 engine with the same throttle setting. We'd actually have to increase the number 1 throttle more than number 2 to produce the same power. Now, as we increase our power all the way to full throttle, we are passing 30 inches. Why are we now reading more than the standard air pressure that is outside? It's because we have a supercharger that is pushing air into the engine. On the runway, our engines are unable to reach their maximum RPM because they're standing still. They're pulling a lot of air. So we can see here number 1 engine is weaker than number 2. Let's pull ourselves up into the air. Aha, now look at this. The RPM is the same of both engines. Why? Well, because we have constant speed propellers on this aircraft. And in the air, this aircraft is going to automatically adjust the propeller pitch until the desired RPM is reached. So in this case, when you're in the air, the problems that were so apparent on the ground are not so apparent in the air. However, if you look closely, you can see the number 1 engine is exhibiting some problems. And the fact that on the B-17 that these gauge needles are overlapping each other makes it even easier for us to identify small problems with the engine. Now let's complicate things even further. Let's turn on our turbocharger. Now, the manifold pressure is reading pretty close to the same. Why? Well, because in our B-17, the turbocharger will automatically apply just the right amount of turbo to give us our desired manifold pressure. Here I'm pulling up one of our Accu-Sim utilities that we use to tune the engines. This is showing us that engine number 1 is actually producing about 125 horsepower less than engine number 2. However, these turbochargers are masking the problem for you, the pilot. Okay, so both our constant speed propeller and our turbocharger can mask engine problems in flight. So what other things can we look for in flight, other than reading these gauges to know that we have an engine problem? Well, do what your engineer does. Look out the window. Look at your engine. How's it running? Is it running smoothly? Is it skipping? Is it vibrating? Vibrating engine is a clear indication something inside is not running quite right. Secondly, you might notice you're burning a little oil. A smoky engine is an indication that something is not right. If one engine is standing out doing something differently than the other three, it's reason for concern. Now on your B-17 you have an engineer, and he will most of the time let you know when there are problems with the engines.
Captain, I think we got a problem.
However, you as the pilot have to understand how an engine operates and how these systems can affect the gauges that you're looking at. Because you and only you, as pilot in command, are responsible for that aircraft and making sure that all the crew aboard make it home safely.